Today guys, we are going to be taking a look to see how good some of these new DLC vehicles are at off-roading. We're going to take a look at the Winky, the Squatty, and the VERUS and see how they compare to the legendary Camacho, which has been the #1 off-roading vehicle in GTA 5 Online since its release date. Now obviously we're talking about off-road vehicles. We're not talking about supercars off-roading, because that's not what they're meant for. We're talking about actual off-road vehicles. The Camacho is #1. So we're going to see how these DLC vehicles compare to them. I hope you guys enjoy the video, and let's jump right into it. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at some of the upgrades. You can see these DLC vehicles have some pretty unique upgrades. They're all pretty crazy. They got a lot of different customization options, which I think is awesome. And when you take a look at these and then you compare them to the upgrades that the Camacho has, the Camacho looks like a vehicle that was released in 2013. Like, the upgrades on that look like nothing compared to some of these new vehicles, which I love to see. That means in the future, we should be getting a lot more customization options for a lot of vehicles, which I am very excited about. So you guys can see the upgrades are obviously great on these vehicles, but it's not all about what the vehicle looks like, it's about how it performs. So let's get into the first test, which is going to be a little drag race and speed test to see how these vehicles compare to the best vehicle in the game for off-roading, obviously the Camacho. So first, let's take a look at the champion of off-roading, the Camacho. This thing will fly down the runway. You guys can see it has no trouble building up speed. The acceleration is great on it, and I believe it reaches a top speed of around like 126, 27 miles per hour, which is actually really good for an off-roading vehicle because it's obviously an off-roading vehicle. It's faster than some supercars in this game. So 126 miles per hour is the speed to beat. Next up, let's take a look at the Winky Jeep. And by the way, none of the upgrades on any of these vehicles actually affect how they perform. Weight does not exist in GTA Online. Whatever Rockstar made the weight of these vehicles, that's what the weight is. So just letting everybody know about that. Armor has no effect, and all of these other cosmetic things have no effect on it whatsoever. But anyways, let's talk about the Winky Jeep. So this thing obviously is not that great. I believe it had trouble reaching up to about 80 miles per hour, which is really terrible. Luckily, this vehicle does have some pretty cool customizations, and that's pretty much all it would be used for. So in terms of actually driving and performance, in terms of driving down a flat strip of land, it does pretty terrible. One thing I did notice with this vehicle, though, that no other vehicle in the game does, if I use my rocket boost that I have when I'm modding on PC, this vehicle for some reason will pop an actual wheelie. This is the only vehicle that isn't supposed to, pull wheelies that can actually pull a wheelie while using this boost. It means that the front end is actually fairly light, which doesn't really make too much sense in my personal opinion. I really don't know why that actually happens. Literally no other vehicle I've ever driven in this game can do this except for muscle cars, but they just do that naturally. Of course, I'm using a little rocket boost whenever I honk the horn. It's just a really weird thing. Not too sure exactly why it does it, but I just wanted to put it in the video. Next up, let's take a look at the ATV that we're getting. Lots of cool customizations for this vehicle as well, and it actually does pretty decent on the runway. One thing I did notice though is these lights on the runway for some reason actually have a pretty decent effect on this vehicle. It causes it to kind of lose control just a little bit, which isn't the best thing for off-roading. So this ATV probably won't perform well in the other off-road tests we're going to perform in just a minute, but honestly, in terms of driving down a straight, flat stretch of land, it doesn't do that bad. It ties with the Winky at about 80 miles per hour. It's just a little bit faster than that vehicle, so that is obviously a great thing about this. It's pretty surprising though that this ATV is actually faster than a Jeep. Doesn't really make too much sense. I wish they did make that Jeep a little bit just better in terms of performance and everything, but we're gonna have to just stick with what we got. But this vehicle reached a top speed of 80 miles per hour down this stretch. Next up, let's test out the SQAUDDIE, which is obviously going to be the best contender to the Camacho. So in terms of acceleration, it's honestly not that bad on pavement. And in terms of its top speed, it completely smokes the ATV and the Winky Jeep, and it actually comes close to comparing with the Camacho, but the Camacho still does beat it out because this vehicle did have a fair bit of trouble going over about 105 miles per hour down this stretch, but it is still pretty decent. 105 miles per hour is not that bad, especially since it is a Hummer, but honestly that's pretty decent. So obviously the Camacho is still #1 in terms of speed and off-roading vehicles, SQAUDDIE's in second, and then the ATV, and then the Jeep. Let's go ahead and head on over to the test track that I always use for off-roading vehicle tests, and see how these vehicles perform on that. So pretty much how all my off-road tests start, we start at this tree that is laying down at the bottom of this mountain and make our way all the way to the very top. It starts off pretty simple, the incline is not that steep, then the vehicles gain a little bit of speed here, and then we reach a steeper incline right up here, which a lot of vehicles do have trouble with, and then the vehicles reach this hill right here, and then there's another hill they can drive down to gain a little bit more speed to go up the final test right here. And if any of the vehicles can make it to the top of this mountain, they are deemed a good off-road vehicle. You can see the Camacho is already up here because you already know this thing can smoke this test, and we're going to be seeing how the Camacho does first. So let's get into it and see how these vehicles perform. So like I said, the Camacho is the best at this. So honestly, if any of these vehicles can beat this or even come close to the time of this Camacho, then they are deemed a very good off-roading vehicle. You could see that this vehicle has no trouble whatsoever on any portions of this track. And most other vehicles will run into problems right here or even at the start, but of course, most of the problems will come up at the end. So of course, the Camacho does make it all the way to the top with a time of about 49 seconds. Now, the first time I did this test, it made it to the top at about 50 seconds. So it actually beat its own record, which is pretty crazy. So 49 seconds is the time to beat for these other vehicles. Down below in the comment section, let me know, do you guys think any of those vehicles will be able to beat that time? Just pause the video, comment down below. Alright, now that you guys have commented, let's go and test out these other vehicles to see how well they do at this test. Okay, so the first vehicle we're testing out is going to be the ATV that is yet to be released in online so far. You could see right off the start, it is having some trouble just getting up this part of the mountain, which pretty much just shows it is not going to make it to the top. If it was having trouble at that point, it is 100% not going to make it to the very top of this mountain. You can even see right here, it's having trouble just getting over 20 miles per hour while going over any kind of incline, which is obviously not great. Now, I would think an ATV would be a little bit better at off-roading. Maybe some of the other ones in the game are, and maybe this one just isn't the best. You can see we kind of got stuck right here. We came to a complete stop, but it did kick back in. And honestly, the reason why I think it's not that great is because it's just really tiny, it doesn't have enough torque, and it just can't pull itself up these not even really steep inclines, just these very mid-level to like basic inclines on this mountain that most vehicles would be able to actually pass. And this vehicle can actually do its best time in about 1 minute and 21 seconds, and it pretty much fails right here. And that's pretty much where it ends. 1 minute and 21 seconds, and it only got to here. The Camacho could have made it all the way to the top and back down in this amount of time. But honestly, it's still a pretty cool vehicle, but it did fail this test. Next up, let's test out the Winky Jeep. Now, you guys already saw. Well, you guys saw multiple things. In the heist, this thing is terrible at those tiny little inclines, and you could see it here in this video as well. And of course, in that little drag race we did at the military base, it didn't even perform as well as the ATV. So you can pretty much already tell what's going to happen with this thing, and it also does fail. 20 seconds later than the ATV did, with a time of 1 minute and 40 seconds is exactly when it failed at, which is pretty sad. Like, this is a Jeep. A Jeep. If you're going to have a Jeep in this game, you got to make it just a little decent at off-roading. You can't add a Jeep to the game and not make it good. I understand it's an older Jeep, but it is still a Jeep, and they are known for their off-roading capabilities. So if this vehicle can't even climb up a mountain and get past this point right here, that is pretty sad, and that is honestly a diss to the name Jeep. So this vehicle is pretty trash at off-roading. 1 minute and 40 seconds is when it failed. Let's go test out the SQAUDDIE. Alright, so now we're taking a look at the SQAUDDIE, and you guys can see it does better at the very start compared to the Jeep did and the ATV, and it's honestly looking pretty decent. Just like how the Camacho was doing, it's doing a pretty damn good job at getting over these hills, and even gained a little bit of air, which is obviously great. So far, this vehicle is looking like a pretty decent off-road vehicle, but the real question is, will it make it to the top of this mountain and beat this test track? If you guys also want to do this, there is literally tons of off-road vehicles in this game that you could do this with, and the links are down below in the description if you guys want to see all of the other vehicles that I've tested going on this little test track up this mountain. All the links are down below, and some of them may surprise you because some of the vehicles look pretty cool and look like they can off-road really well, but they really can't. Anyways, let's get back to the Squatty here. You can see I did have to take a little bit of a different route because it was having a little bit of trouble going up that one portion that is very steep. But you guys can see still in the end, it did end up making it to the very top of the mountain in a time of 1 minute and 12 seconds, which is actually very, very good. That is not bad at all. Some of you may say 1 minute and 12 seconds, that's pretty far behind the Camacho. But don't forget, the Camacho is the best in the game. This vehicle actually ties for third at this test, and I've tested pretty much all of the off-roading vehicles in this test. The exact same road and everything, and it ties for third with the Coil Brawler at 1 minute and 12 seconds and the Caracara 4x4 at 1 minute and 1 second. Which is actually pretty cool. Like I said, if you guys do want to see that video, the link is down below in the description. I test out like 12 different other off-road vehicles in this game to see how well they perform on this test. And like I said, this vehicle is the third best in the game at this test, which is actually very, very good. The final test we're going to perform is the climbing test. Climbing up a steep incline like this, driving straight up the side of this mountain. This thing's at like a 110-degree angle. It's pretty damn steep. If they could just make it to the top of this, they're pretty damn good at climbing. So we're going to test it the Camacho first. You guys already know this thing is going to have no trouble whatsoever. Just plows straight up this mountain, sitting at a pretty decent speed considering it's a pretty steep angle. And it makes it to the top with literally no issues whatsoever. Obviously, you would expect that though. So now taking a look at the Squatty, it did need a little bit of a boost at the very start. Not talking about mods, it just needed to gain a little bit of speed before it made it to the top. And it does manage to do it. And it does it at a pretty decent speed too. It's coasting at about 15 miles per hour up the steep part, which is pretty damn good. And it still makes it to the very top. And obviously I could test the other two vehicles as well, but from the last test, and even when I did them on this test, they literally could not make it up. They were so terrible, and I knew for a fact they would never make it up this, so there's really no point in actually doing an official test for those vehicles because they just won't make it up the mountain. So in the end, after tallying up all the results, the Winky and the ATV are obviously in last place. They did terrible at everything. They're pretty crappy off-road vehicles. Second place, we got the Squatty. It's like the mid-range vehicle. Not as good as the Camacho, but it is the third best in the game at the off-road test that we performed, which is still very great, and it has tons of cool upgrade capabilities. And obviously the Camacho is number one, the best off-roading vehicle in the game. So if you guys are looking for a great off-road vehicle, the Camacho is your best bet, and it's also very cheap. The Squatty is not a bad option though, tons of upgrades, and it actually performs pretty well. It's a little bit harder to control though compared to the Camacho, and honestly I'm not too sure why, maybe because it's a Hummer, it's a lot heavier, not too sure, but still the Squatty is great. The Winky and the VERUS ATV are not that great. But anyways, that's pretty much going to wrap up the video for today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you did enjoy it. Like I said, if you want to check out the other off-road tests we've done, the link is down below in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.